right, everybody, welcome to Re-Engage. We're going to talk about communication tonight, okay? And let me start off with this quote here from Gottman Research. They said that purely by watching couples talk to one another, that the researchers can predict with an 88 to 93% accuracy whether or not the couple will still be married 2 to 5 years from now, all based on how well they communicate. You know what that means? That means that communication is a really big deal. And I've got to say the communication between Shannon and I has gotten so much better over the years, except for last week. Last week, not so good on my end.
I struggled a little bit.
I struggled a little bit,
okay.
Which is good. But you know what? This lesson is good because we all need to be reminded of how important communication can be, right? So anyway, I was thinking about communication and I thought about that we have to tell the desk story.
Yes, you love that story.
I love the desk story. Because here's what happened with the desk story. And this, I think communication may have broken down a little bit.
I feel like I communicated very well. But go ahead.
Let's let them be the judge of that.
Okay.
So Shannon is working from home and she needed a desk.
Right.
So of course what she did, this was probably 4 years ago?
Yeah, at least.
At least 4 years ago.
Maybe
So eBay, we don't do eBay as much anymore, but back then we were doing it a lot more.
Craigslist.
Oh, it was Craigslist even worse.
Better. Yeah.
Yes.
I don't know if I should even tell people that.
She found a desk on Craigslist for her home office, and so she was like, I love this desk. I need this desk. So
Well, it was an armoire.
No, but you didn't tell. But I didn't know that.
I did tell you. Whether or not you heard that,
Okay.
I don't know. Okay,
So there you go. I wasn't listening.
Your mind, it's a desk. In my mind, I knew it was an armoire.
All I was hearing was desk.
Right.
Okay, so anyway, you get the location. We drive out there like on a Tuesday night at like 8:30. It's dark.
It's dark.
It's dark. The address ended up being at these people's house.
Yeah.
This house that's out in the middle of the woods.
Right.
We're driving down a dirt road to get to this.
Mm-hmm.
The whole family's in the car,
Yes.
and Abby is crying in the back seat because she thinks we're going to get shot.
Killed.
Yes, because we have no idea where we're going.
Right.
So
Well, it was a little scary.
it was a little scary. So we're driving the whole time. I'm like, do you really need this desk? Do you really need this? Yes, we need
This
this.
is the desk.
So we pull up to the front.
And it was a nice family. I mean, it was
a nice family. We pull up. You walk inside I'm standing there
Right.
on the outside of the truck because Abby's in the car.
In case you and Abby need to make a getaway. You send me in the house.
Go look at it. Go look at it. Make sure.
Good luck.
Make sure the coast is clear.
I'll stay right here.
So you walk. Yeah, I can see you. You're in the door frame, and you go, yes, this is.
Yes.
But it's a little big. It's a little big. So I'm like, okay. So I walk in the door. I look to the left thinking I'm going to see a desk, and instead what I did was I did this.
Yeah, it was about.
This thing couldn't
7
fit in our
feet tall?
yard. Y'all, this thing was huge. I feel like Clark Griswold.
I think you're exaggerating a little bit.
It was huge.
It was big and it was heavy, which I knew it was going to be because I wanted an armoire that I could close doors on the desk and it would look nice in the living room.
Again,
so it was what I wanted.
Either you communicated that to me and I wasn't listening. I did not realize what, so I was like, so we ended up, it came apart in like two pieces. We had to get extra family members of theirs to help us carry it out. We get it home. I don't even know how we got it out of the truck.
Right.
But then it was too big to go in the spot, so you took it to pieces.
I did.
You broke it all apart.
In the living room.
In the living room. For like a month. It was in pieces.
Because I was going to paint it.
Because you decided to paint it, which we have to paint everything. So it's in pieces all over the place.
Right.
And then once it's
painted. Where I messed up is I didn't measure the spot for it before I took it all apart and decided to paint it.
And I can't stress how much I love when there's a mess.
Yes. And then leave that mess for a month.
And then leave it for...
lots of communication.
There was a lot of communication problems that month. So then the best part is that once it all got put back together and in the spot, Shannon turns, after it's all done, like a month later, she turns to me and goes, I don't think I like it. I think we need to give it to Goodwill.
Oh, Goodwill got a nice painted armoire.
Yes, they did.
Some family.
Yes, they did. So anyway, we look back on that now and laugh, but during that whole process, I'm sure the communication probably broke down a few times and all of that. That's just how it is. I'm sure that you all have your same stories. Maybe not a huge armoire story,
not that long,
but stories in your life where communication has broken down. Okay, but the goal of communicating with each other is to understand. So we want to start off with a verse that comes from James 1:19.
And that says, everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. So the communication is not to be right or get your point across or to win the argument. Instead, when we follow this formula from James of listening first, being slow to speak, and slow to become angry, it goes well for us.
Yeah, it goes well. Like, if the goal was to be right all the time, well, the verse will be flipped around when it comes to that part of listening and speaking, right? In fact, if you flip listen and speak around, it becomes this. It becomes this. If you want to be angry, here's what you do. Be slow to listen and quick to speak, because that'll do it every time. That's where we lose our cool. That's where we get angry. And this is what happens all the time in marriage. So in your marriage, here's what we want. We want communication. The goal of it is mutual understanding, okay? Now, there's two approaches to communication with your spouse, okay? There's the approach of somebody's going to win. Right? Somebody's going to win this argument. Somebody's going to win this communication battle, and somebody's going to lose, and it's not going to be me, right? Or there is the mutual goal of communicating to understand one another. Like, when we communicate, we're trying to win together, not individually, right? Now, the main reason we don't do so well communicating is because we're just selfish. We really are. And James 4 reminds us of that. So you want to read that for us?
It says, why do you fight and argue with each other? Isn't it because you are full of selfish desires that fight to control your body? You want something you don't have, and you will do anything to get it. You will even kill. But you still cannot get what you want, and you won't get it by fighting and arguing. You should pray for it. Yet even when you do pray, your prayers are not answered because you pray just for selfish reasons.
Yeah, look at all the selfishness in those verses. You fight and you argue. Why? Because you have selfish motives. That's what it comes down to. Okay, so there are 4 negative communication patterns that we want to talk about. And you know what? When Shannon and I talk about this, everything in you watching this is probably going to want to nudge your spouse a little bit and go, ooh, he's talking about you. But you know what? Challenge yourself as we talk through these and as you look at these in your handouts to really acknowledge your own negative patterns. Okay, so let's start off with number 1. It's withdrawal and avoidance, okay? This is the unwillingness to really get in or to stay with an important discussion, okay? This is where someone always is saying, I'm done, and they just withdraw. Or when somebody says, you know what, we need to talk about something, and then the other person is like, oh, no, I don't know if I want to talk about that, and they try to distract you from talking about it, and, they don't really want to get into it, It could be as direct as just leaving the conversation altogether, right? Or it's as subtle and it looks like just shutting down emotionally. Like you're trying to have a conversation, but the withdrawer, I have a hard time saying that word.
Yeah, that's a tough one.
Yeah, just shuts down. It's almost like they're communicating with their behavioral patterns that it's just not that important to them, right? Or for a lot of people, they just try to avoid the hard topics altogether. Okay? This type of person might be willing to say whatever needs to be said just to get done with the conversation, just to get out of the conversation. So I'm going to say the negative part of these things, and then you're going to tell everybody how to fix it. Because
how to fix it.
You're better at this than I am. So why don't you tell everybody how to fix it?
So how to fix it if you are the withdrawer. So you want to stay in the conversation. Or if you can't stay in the conversation, then at least tell them why so that they can see the importance of talking through it. Mm-hmm. If you're on the other side of withdrawing, ask yourself, what is it about me that makes it hard for my spouse to stay in the conversation?
Right.
Maybe even be willing to ask for feedback. And another question for your spouse could be, what could I do to make you feel safe in talking to me or communicating with me?
Right. That's good stuff. Okay, so the second one is escalation. Okay, this is when spouses respond negatively towards each other and they just continue to up the ante so the conversation gets more and more hostile. Okay, and this shows out in a few ways. Like it shows out in how people want to get the last word in. I know that's a lot of the times, like we want to have that last word. Or, sometimes we immediately picture escalation as a couple like yelling and screaming at each other. And as many of us know, it does happen that way. But it can also happen in sarcasm. It can also have just like these subtle attacks on each other. You know, those little digs here and there that we know upsets our spouse. Or it can also be extreme language, okay? And I'm not just talking about bad words, although bad words in conversation, in arguments that we have, that's extreme language, of course. But it's always, like I said before, it's kind of like up in the ante. It's always escalating it and making it a really big deal. Like somebody's 5 minutes late and then you yell, well, you're always late. And then they're like, well, I can't stand you. And you're like, well, I can't stand your shirt. You look stupid. And you're like, but you bought me this shirt. I don't know where I'm going with all that. But anyway, but you know how that happens. It just kind of builds and builds and builds. So how do you help with escalation? So Shannon's going to tell you how to fix it.
So maybe calling a timeout for both to back away and then revisiting it after you've had time to cool off. Mm-hmm. This way you're saying, I love you more than just allowing myself to blow my top on this.
Yeah.
Maybe you could say, I'd love to have this conversation. Could we talk about it tomorrow? Mm-hmm. If we could I get a few more minutes?
Just a little pause.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I typically am the one that needs a little time when we are having these tough conversations, and you like to get over it quickly, get it done. Mm-hmm. So we usually have to communicate about that.
Yes. But when you do take that time, then the next one is like, be sure to like call a time in.
Yes. So you're not using it as a way to get out of the conversation. Mm-hmm. You're going to come back to it. Think about it as a race to the spirit. Who can be under control of the spirit first and not who can hold out the longest.
Yeah, that's so good. Let the spirit control you and your conversation. There's actually a vicious cycle of the escalator and withdrawer. Okay, the one that we just talked about. Okay, the withdrawer, they don't feel safe or secure to talk, or they might feel nagged, and the escalator feels like the other one won't share because they just don't care about the relationship. And the two, you got to be careful with those two, because they just, if one of you is one and the other's the other, they can just kind of feed off of each other sometimes. Okay, and the third one is negative interpretation, okay? And here's what this is. It's when someone believes that the motives of their spouse are more negative than that's really the case, okay? It's when you're wondering to yourself, like, why did they say that? Like, what's behind that statement, okay? Like, for example, one of the guys that was given this talk, he used the example of how his wife used to text him every day at 4. And she was always asking him, when are you coming home? And he's like, why is she always hounding me with that? Like, what is she getting at? Why does she want to know what time I'm going to be home? Sometimes you have a negative interpretation in areas where we have a little insecurity, okay? So, this could show up and be as innocent as somebody that asks the questions that many times a spouse will ask another spouse, like, is that what you're going to wear? Probably don't ask that question.
Don't ask me that question.
Don't ask that question. Let me give you a better example. How about this? What's for dinner? Like, should I get some pizza? Now, a negative interpretation could say, well, what's wrong with my dinners? Like, was my dinner not good last night? When maybe the person is only trying to say, can I help? But how do you fix negative interpretations?
So how to fix it? Believe the best, and don't just automatically assume the worst. When in doubt, you can always ask for clarification.
Right.
Like, when you call every day at 4 p.m., what do you mean? Mm-hmm. What I mean is, what time are you coming home?
Yeah, it just could be that simple.
That simple.
Don't read anything into it. Yeah.
If the relationship is characterized by believing the best, then there's trust and years of long commitment.
Right.
Having
That's
a
good.
fundamental belief that your spouse is for you, and also vice versa.
Right. Absolutely. Okay, the fourth one is invalidation. Okay, this is where we're either subtly or directly putting down the thoughts or the feelings or the character of our spouse, right? It's when we try to cross-examine our spouse. Like, it's a way that we tend to pick their opinions apart, right, or their views apart, and just make it seem like the other person isn't being logical, okay? Instead of really trying to understand what their point of view might be, right? One person in your relationship, they may feel something, and then the other person invalidates it and just said, that's not valid. You're just being emotional. And they just shut you down. Like, they just shoot you down, right? What ends up happening is that the other person will just not want to bring up the issue or have much of a conversation at all in the future. So how do you fix that? How do you fix it?
So remember that the goal of communication is to understand. If this is the case, then the put downs or the jabs are not going to help you achieve your goal.
Right.
So maybe in your group time tonight, consider talking about which one of these are your negative communication pattern, and then get feedback from your spouse on what these patterns look like in your marriage.
Right. And then look at the bottom here of the why it matters. Why it matters, okay? The first letter of each one of these patterns, it spells weenie. Now, we had a lot of fun in our group time talking about this, and I'm sure you will tonight as well. But you can use this the next time one of these negative communication patterns pops up. Okay, make a joke about it, but say, don't be a weenie, okay? Let's stick through this and let's have a good conversation, okay? Also, another thing that you need to do is to practice active listening, okay? When you begin to really listen to each other, you're fighting harder to understand their point of view rather than just trying to get your point of view across, right? So we want to ultimately, what we want in communication is to get to a better place. So when it comes to active listening, here's what you can do. Maybe try repeating what the other person says and really listening to the other person to really try to understand. You know what we tend to do is that sometimes when we're arguing or having communication, we're not really paying attention to listen to them. We're just kind of reloading in our mind so that we're ready to fire back a response. And that's not appropriate. That's what we're getting at here, right? So really active listen and repeat what they're saying, okay? Also remember that you are listening to a son or a daughter of Christ, okay? Philippians 2 is a great verse to end on. It says, do nothing from selfish ambition or conceit, but in humility count others, especially your spouse, more significant than yourself. Okay? And when you do this in communication, great things happen, and it can be a game changer. So we want you to take a few minutes with your group tonight and talk through which of the 4 negative communication patterns that you most identify with, okay? The first step in helping us communicate is maybe understanding how each one of us ticks, okay? So we're going to hand it over to your group leaders now. We love y'all. Have a great week. Did you want to say anything else?
Did you?